Hello, it's lecture time. And let me just make an addition because I said I was going to put the box to send me a video in the announcements. It's not in the announcements, it'll be in this lecture. So, again, those of you that want to do that, it makes my day. And even if, again, you don't do anything, just show me your cute little face. I'm so thrilled to see you and talk. And even if I'm not talking back to you, I really am talking back at you. Like one of my people that sent me was showing me something in her book, and the whole time I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cute, it's so cute. So I am talking back to you, even though we're not really talking. So and also, again, I hope again that even if it happens after school, that we do get to meet one final time, because somebody said on one of those videos that I didn't even think about, and that like broke my heart into a million pieces, that for those of you that have had me for 3 years, which are most of you, like this is our last time together. And for it to end like this without our usual, I usually have awards, the 3 years in a row club. So we'll have to figure out some way this summer, once we get taken off of our lockdown, to get together and have some kind of send off for our last time together, because I didn't even think about it. And when um, she said it, it like broke my heart in a million pieces. So anyway, let's get back to the task at hand, because this is going to be long anyway without me adding extra stuff that I should have said in the announcements. So we're going to begin our next set of notes, the 1920s. In the 1920s, I have the notes divided into society and into politics and the Great Depression. So I'm going to do society first. Usually I do politics and the Great Depression, but I'm just going to switch it up a bit, mostly because politics and depression are depressing, and the society is kind of fun. So we're going to talk about that. I usually you guys are reading Great Gatsby at this time. Oh, snap. Sorry, I just knocked my notes on the ground. Sorry. Usually you guys are reading Great Gatsby at this time, so it helps that we're at the same place. And I'm assuming that you are at the Great Gatsby. I don't know what Mrs. Hollis is doing, but I'm assuming. So this will tie into that as well. The 1920s, again, is a unique time period in that we're coming out of a global war. We're coming out of that global war really different than when we went in. When we went in, we were an economic superpower, and we had been an economic superpower really since towards the end of the Gilded Age, the 1880s, 1890s. We're coming out of World War I a political superpower, and that puts us in a really different place than we've ever been before in the history of our country. And again, that is due to both President Wilson's 14 points and that Treaty of Versailles. Now, when we come out of that, we're coming out as a political leader, but we're also going to go into this period and this time of great isolation. Remember, we don't approve, the Senate does not ratify the Treaty of Versailles, and part of the reason is we don't want to get involved in anything else. And so even though we are a political leader and an economic superpower, we also begin to isolate ourselves, this time period of great isolation. So the other part is of this society of World War I is what comes back from World War I. We have men who are coming back who have seen incredible horrors, mechanized death, trench warfare, just horrific ways that men can kill each other. We also have a group of minorities coming back who fought for democracy in another country. Those would be African Americans, Mexican Americans. We're also going to have another minority group, which really aren't minority groups, but they still get called that, women and females, who did two things on either parts of the side of the war, right? They went to war as nurses, ambulance drivers, but then the ones that stayed home went out to work, took up jobs that men left behind. So those things are going to be very different. We're also coming back to a country that now has prohibition, no alcohol. And that again will play a huge role as we move through the 1920s. So let's get our notes. And again, it's going to cause me to look down. Now I'm going to have a question mark here, and I'm going to leave a little text box to ask. how you would like to think about doing this, because I have the ability to put the notes up and have that on the screen, and we can do the notes and you won't see my face and you will just hear me talk, which for some of you that might be, oh my God, yes, crazy eye lady, I don't want to see you doing that all the time. Or you might just like this, like me dropping my notes, getting ready to take a drink out of my lovely, awesome cup that always gets great comments. So tell me what you want me to do, because I can do either. I can pull the notes up and do a screening of the notes, and you'll just see the notes and we'll run through it that way, or we could do it this way. So you just let me know. All right, so I'm going to look at and I'm starting with American society in the 1920s. That's the heading. And the first are a couple of vocab words that you really need to know these vocab words. A radical. And when we talk about a radical, this time we're talking about very specific types of radicals: socialists, communists, and anarchists. And those are the ones that we're going to talk about the most. Conservative. This, please make sure you understand and underline this. We're not talking about conservative like a political party. We're talking about conservative as in a political belief. Refers to preserving the existing order rather than changing. And this is this idea of normalcy, returning to the way things were. Reactionary, a desire to move society back into a past and this idealized society. And then liberal, advocating changes in society institutions to reflect changing conditions. And those changing conditions would be women getting the right to vote, African Americans, Mexican Americans, and how all of those people are going to fit into a country that fought for democracy but does not have democracy in their own country. And so that's what we're looking at. So we're going to start with these terms and this terminology. And the first one is Americanism. And this will begin, again, a second rise of nativism. Not as if it's ever gone away, but this one is really going to explode in the 1920s. What is an American? What does it mean to be an American? How do we define an American? And I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. Anytime we do that, it's always bad. What it means to be an American is 3 billion different ways to be an American, right? Because that's what it means to be an American. But when we start defining, if you don't show this, if you don't do this, or if you're not wearing this, or if you're not showing this type of attitude, then you're un-American. That's a problem. And it always will be a problem, because the foundation of America is, again, this idea of a whole bunch of different people with a whole bunch of different ideas coming together to make this perfect society, this city on a hill. And a city on a hill is not going to be asking, are you doing this? Are you wearing this? Are you doing that? So that's what we're going to look at. And the 1920s is going to be defined by that. So the first thing we're looking at is this thing called the Red Scare. And when you see the word red from this point until we get to the 1945s, red always means communism, that Bolshevik communist red. Eventually in the 1920s, we're going to change it to pinko, which is really even cooler. But anytime you see that word red, you need to think communism. So what has happened is Russia has had their revolution in 1917, 1918, and they are now a communist nation. And the background of a communist party is two things that scare the bejesus out of the United States. One, a violent overthrow of capitalism. Scary. Number two, they are atheist. We don't know if there's a God. We have no idea. They are atheist. So those two things are terrifying to the United States. This idea of a violent overthrow of capitalism and government, and this idea of atheism. So that's our Red Scare. And so again, fear of radicalism. And again, radicalism is Bolshevik, is communist. Large number of strikes, bombings, all of this is going to give us this thing called the Red Scare. And what is going to happen is very much like what's going to happen in the 1950s, what you read in The Crucible, what we talked about in the Salem witch trials. We're going to start targeting people. You're a commie, you're a commie, you're a commie. And as soon as you say that, how do you defend yourself? You can't. You can't defend yourself. Again, October 1917, Bolshevik Revolution, paranoia that communism is going to come to the United States. And we do have the Communist Party. We have the Communist Party today. You can belong to that. It is never very large, but the Communist Party does exist. We also have large numbers of strikes. And if we remember back in the Gilded Age and as we moved into the 20th century, those strikes often always, even though they weren't, but they were always targeted with this idea of socialism slash communism. And so strikes, again, are going to be this attack on capitalism. That's the way that the capitalists will perceive this, that there's some kind of attack on the idea of communism. What's going to happen after World War I is what usually happens after wars, as we get this inflation, depression, this difficult economic time when we turn our economy from a war economy back to a peacetime. And it's difficult to change those, and it always happens. At the bottom of that page, large result of inflation during World War I, and we'll begin for workers saying, we need to be paid a living wage. We understood during wartime we weren't going to strike, but now things are different and we might have the need to strike. Turning the page. On page 2, many Americans believe labor troubles were the result of Bolshevik, and when we get to the radio, we'll talk about this evangelical use of the radio with Christianity. So on page 2, we have a general strike, and that takes place January 19th, most famous strike in the United States history. And a general strike is going to take place in Seattle, Washington. And a general strike is very impactful because a general strike means every union goes on strike. So if this, and I believe this starts with a shipyard. Yeah, this starts with a shipyard. Shipyard workers go on strike. And in order to help those ship workers or those dock workers, those people that are moving goods off ships onto the dock, hard, intense labor, all other unions in Seattle go on strike as well. So I'm going to kind of use modern day unions so that you could understand. So if the ship workers go on strike, then pipe fitters go on, and boiler makers and bus drivers and the trash collectors. All of the unions in Seattle went on strike and virtually shut down the city. And so it is, again, a peaceful order. The mayor is going to do what all of our other mayors have done. They're going to call for troops to head off the anarchy of Russia. And at the bottom of page 2, something that we don't really think about, police officers are in unions, but in Boston, in September, there is a Boston police strike. 70% of Boston's police went on strike, and you can imagine the terror in the city of Boston. And what they were working for, again, is wage increases and the right to unionize. Work 70 to 80 hours with no pay. And again, the National Guard's going to get called out to put that strike down. And again on page 3, we've got a steel strike, this attempt to unionize. And if we look in the middle of page 3, failure of strike marked a hardening of Americans on labor. So again, these strikes are going to have really the same impact that they did in the Gilded Age, that these strikes help no one. They don't help the unions. They don't help factory owners. And who's caught and who gives this view of unions as communist will be most of the middle class people in the United States. And then again, our last one, the union mine workers, will only be successful because it goes to arbitration. So at the bottom of that page, we have a really important part of this Red Scare called the Palmer Raids. And the Attorney General, his name is Palmer, which is where we get that name from. And in this time period, anarchists, communists, are sending through the mail pipe bombs. And so people would get a package, open it, and it explodes. And again, that is terroristic in nature, that it terrifies people, that any package could be a pipe bomb. And that is the intent of terrorism, right, is to invoke terror in people. So we get bomb scares, and they are terrifying, and the Attorney General says, I need to get this under control, and we need to make sure that we're getting that. So he starts looking into different groups. The bottom of page 3, terrorist bombings in 1919 and 1920. One of the worst ones is going to occur on Wall Street. And what will happen I think that one's in 1920, is a horse and carriage. So it appeared to be like a shop owner moving his wares parked in front of the stock market, but instead of it being filled with barrels of beer or loaves of bread or any kind of things for sale, it was full of explosives, and it exploded, and it caused great damage, loss of life, 38 people dead. It sent terror through lower Manhattan and around Wall Street. And the Attorney General is going to get a pipe bomb sent to him, to his home in Washington. So these pipe bombs are pretty scary. And so Palmer is going to start using his role as the Attorney General to begin seeking out these anarchists. And so in order to prevent that, what's going to happen is these Americanism things. And again, it's important to note whose idea it is to be an American. So on the top of page 4, making teachers sign loyalty oaths, emphasizing this idea of Americanism. They'll start to deport radicals, and on January 2nd in 1920, 5,000 suspected communists will be arrested in 33 cities. Now, it is not a crime to be a communist. That's not a crime. So what are you arrested for? Most of them will be arrested without a warrant. Most of them will be denied attorneys. Most of them will be deprived of food, bathroom, and a lot of them are going to be deported even though they're American citizens. So the important part of this Americanization, Red Scare, is the idea of losing constitutional privileges and rights as Americans that as a result of this fear of communism. And that is what always happens with this idea of an Americanism, or being fearful of some outside, that we lose a lot of those constitutional rights as a result of trying to protect from this hidden fear. Conservatives will use the Red Scare to break the backs of fledgling unions, and that again will be the end of unions for the 1920s. They will just cease to have any power because instantly they'll be determined to be communist sympathizer, and so no one's going to get any traction. At the bottom of page 4, the Sacco and Vanzetti case is a really important part of American history for a lot of reasons. Oh, there's my dog in the background. In 1921, Sacco and Vanzetti are charged and convicted of killing 2 people in a robbery in Massachusetts, and they're Italians. They're atheists. They say they're atheists. They're anarchists. They say they're anarchists. They dodged the draft in World War I. They're not great people. But just because you're not a great person doesn't mean that you're not given those same constitutional rights. And instead of being tried on evidence of the crime, they're tried on their character, and they are convicted and sent to the electric chair, and they will be, oh, sorry about that, they will be sentenced to death by the electric chair, and they are going to die in the electric chair. And it gives the United States really a horrible name throughout the world at that time. And case, I'm on the top of page 5 now. Case attracted world attention. Riots break out in Japan, in Warsaw, in Paris, Buenos Aires after. And many Americans, again, will take issue with that case. And in 1977, Governor Michael Dukakis vindicates both of them, claiming that that they weren't given fair trials. It's really seen as probably the worst case of nativism, Red Scare, Americanism during this time period, the 1920s, that these 2 men are executed, not because of the crime and the evidence of the crime, but because of who they were. And that's really not what our justice system is about. The next part is KKK. So we had the KKK originating right after the Civil War in the parts of the South under Reconstruction when the Union was dictating to those southern states what and how they were going to deal with the freed blacks. And in order to get some control over that, the KKK rose up. As soon as Reconstruction was over and the South was allowed to return back to its normalcy, the KKK kind of went away. It rises up again in the 1920s as to what we know the KKK is about today. And the difference in this KKK will be that it doesn't just stay in the South. It moves, and I don't know if that just happened, it moves everywhere. So, resurgence of the KKK begins in the South, but also into the Midwest, and in particular, 3 states, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Midwest will have 40% of these new Klan members. Again, I think I've talked about this movie, Birth of a Nation, before. It's one of 2 times I actually walked out of a class. It's Birth of a Nation is a retelling of the Civil War with this idea of this great lost cause of the South and this great fondness for the way the South looked. And one of the reasons that it is there, again, is to justify to those older Southern people still alive that what they fought for wasn't the right to keep slavery. It was for our heritage. That's the buzzword. And this lost cause that swept away our heritage, which your heritage is tied to slavery. So on page 5, please look at C2. Most resembled natives know-nothings and these anti-black terrorists in the 1860s. But please look at 2A. This 1920 KKK is an equal opportunity hate group. They hate lots and lots of people. They hate immigrants, all immigrants. They hate Catholics, all Catholics. Blacks, Jews, communists, bootleggers. Bootleggers are people that are going to be running illegal alcohol, gambling, adulterers, and any discussion of birth control. KKK is against all of that. They are white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant. They are extremists and ultra-conservative. Again, it only comes to an end really in the middle of the 1920s as a result of the leader of all the KKK, the Grand Wizard, who happens to be from the state of Indiana. We don't get to talk about Indiana very often in U.S. history. This is not a good time to bring up Indiana. He is the leader of the KKK of the entire United States in Indiana. And he transported a very young female into Illinois, and on the train ride sexually assaulted her so horrifically that she died from sexual assault. And he felt, as it says in the I am the law in Indiana, nothing's going to happen to me. But it was a scandal, and it leads, thankfully, to the demise of the Klan. They also embezzled a lot of money, and finally it goes away. On page 6, nativism. Again, we know what that nativism is. It is anti-immigration, but please draw a big box around page 6, nativism, because this will give us our first immigration quotas. We had our first real look at immigration laws with the Chinese Anti-Exclusion Act, where we said no Chinese. And that, again, is an immigration law, but not really what we're getting ready to do. Until we get to 1921, our borders are open, and anyone can come into the United States, and anyone can become a citizen of the United States. So in 1921, we say, nah, we're done with that. Not going to do it anymore. 1921 Immigration Act ended open immigration with a limit and a quota system. And we still have that quota system today, that we only allow so many people from such countries per year, per 10 years. And that quota system is really held up for a long period of time. Again, you can look at the numbers, but that will be 1921. And then really what we're looking at is the really important one, 1924 National Origins Act. Reduce immigrants to 152,000 and look at a certain group. Please look at 3C, reduced numbers from Eastern and Southern Europe. That would be Polish, Italians, Russian, because they are seen as less American. We're not going to change the immigration on Western Europeans. You guys can come in. Brits, Germans, French, Spanish, and this is people from Spain, come on in, borders are open. But if you're from these less than desirable places, Poles, Italians, Russians, we're going to limit you. Asians, banned completely. 1924, no Asians, none at all. Irish and Germans, not as effective. Canadian and Latin Americans will be exempt. We have open borders going back and forth. And then the Act of 1929, again, will cut immigration in half again. So we're really, again, limiting this immigration for the first time really in our history. The bottom of page 6, Scopes trial. Please make sure you note out to the side that this is also known as the monkey trial. This is, again, where religion and science will part and probably never come back together again. We are never, ever, ever, ever getting back together. And this is the monkey trial. So Mr. Scopes is a teacher in Tennessee. He's a science teacher. And state of Tennessee said, you cannot teach evolution. Can't do it. And the ACLU said, hey, we really don't think this is right. We kind of got this separation thing in our Constitution. And we're looking for a teacher who will teach evolution and get arrested so we can bring this to trial. And so that's what happens. The Scopes trial, better known as the monkey trial. In 1925, high school biology teacher John Scopes agrees. He's arrested. And the ACLU says we'll take to court. And we have Clarence Darrow defending Mr. Scope, and guess who? William Jennings Bryan. This will be the last time we say his name because he's going to die right after this trial. But remember William Jennings Bryan. He's run for president 4 times. He was Secretary of State. He's been a lot of stuff, but he will be the prosecutor. He is a Presbyterian fundamentalist. Remember, he is our pacifist. He also removed himself from Wilson's Secretary of State because of war. So, as always, what happens with many of these trials is it is not about teaching evolution. It is really, as it says on page 7, fundamentalism. It's really religion itself that's on trial, which is why at the time this was the trial of the century. It's broadcast on radio. Everybody's listening to it across the country. This is where, for those of you, again, people of faith, this has become a fundamental part of faith, and it's hidden under D. Ryan asked about the length of his literal biblical beliefs. Did he think the earth was really created in 6 days? And William Jennings Bryan said, we don't know. We don't know God's days. Was it a 24-hour day for God? We don't know that. And so that kind of gives Christianity this pivot point on this 6 days thing, right? We don't know whose idea of a day it was. He is found, Scopes obviously is found guilty because he did it, fined $100. Again, this begins this contest between religion and science in the 1920s that, again, if I may borrow words from one of the great songwriters, we are never, ever, ever, ever getting back together. Prohibition, we've talked about that a little bit. Again, Prohibition, 18th Amendment, it's ratified in 1919. Churches love it, fundamentalists love it. Who else loves it? Will be gangsters, because gangsters are gonna make some big bank on prohibition, moving alcohol. And here's the problem with prohibition. People that never ever drank, now are going to drink. Why? Because you can't. When you tell people that you can do something, there's a whole lot of people that say, why can't I do it? What's so bad about it? Let me try this. So in essence, prohibition does nothing at all that it attempts to do. And if we remember correctly, it's one of the largest failures of the progressive movement. Remember that. So page 7, Volstead Act, again, you cannot manufacture, move, transport, consume alcohol. That's what we're looking at. Alcohol, at the beginning, there's no enforcement because there was no need. So on page 8, going through, what we get is, as I stated already, the rise of organized crime. And again, huge profits from bootlegging. Huge profits. there goes all my papers again. This is also the beginning of this lovely thing called NASCAR, because we got to have fast cars that get this bootlegged liquor from one place to another. We got all these lists on page on page 8. Al Capone, Dillinger, speakeasies. Please look at the only real thing that I want you to draw attention to is 3B, speakeasies. And a speakeasy is a bar. Prior to Prohibition, there's no way in God's green earth a middle-class woman, a rich woman, would have been found in a bar. Never. But because of Prohibition, we now can go in them, and they're called speakeasies. And these speakeasies are secret bars. They're tucked all over the place. They have secret knocks. You know, you do the first part, you know, you knock back. There's a little code. You have to have a secret password to get in, and everybody wants in these places. So women can drink now in speakeasies. Never could drink before. Never could drink in public like that. Now we can. Prohibition is going to finally be repealed in 1933, 14 years. It's a long 14 years with everybody drinking. Everybody drinking. In 1933, President Roosevelt is in the White House drinking martinis. Nobody pays attention to Prohibition. So, lastly, we're going to end up, where am I at on my time? Ooh, how much time? Oh, I'm at 30 minutes already. Okay. On page 8, the bottom, glorification of business. This is the 1920s. Please note on your notes on the bottom of page 1920, the 1920s is the businessman, period. That's what it is. All of our presidents in the 1920s are going to be businessmen. Hint, they're going to lead us to a great destruction called the Great Depression. Their business-wise did not help at all. At the bottom of page 8, a book that is important to remember. It's called The Man Nobody Knows by Bruce Barton, top-selling book, and it creates this persona of Jesus as a businessman. Here's the best businessman in the world, Jesus, selling us on this new thing called Christianity. Picked up 12 men from the bottom of society, forged an organization that conquered the world. What do you want your young sons to be? Businessmen. Not intellectuals, not professors, not doctors, not lawyers, businessmen. That's what you want to be. At the top of page 9, Calvin Coolidge says, the man who builds a factory builds a temple, and the people that work there worship there. So that, again, is important. Very, very important. All right, this next set of stuff is just a whole bunch of list of things that we can get through fairly quickly. U.S. came out of World War I, the largest creditor nation. We are giving credit to everyone, everyone. And we are doing that because of technology. So wages at an all-time high, new technology. We've got electric motors. We've got assembly lines. We've got inventions, the telephone, the television. Television's not going to get much motion yet until the 1950s. Medical breakthroughs, constructions. We've got businessmen making money hand over fist. The top of page 10, white collar workers. That's the businessman. I'm putting on a suit and a tie, and I'm sitting behind a desk. And that's what we're going to do. And I also told you on page 10 are women increasingly. They are called pink collar workers. And again, typewriters, teachers, shop clerks. And on the middle of page 10, advertising. That's the biggest industry for businessmen, is to get into advertising. All these new things and how badly you need these things and what you need to make you the best person that you can be. Sports becomes a big business. And then the other thing, to borrow a big box around at the bottom of page 10, scientific management by Frederick W. Taylor. And this is the assembly line. Start a movement to develop more efficient methods to increase productivity. This is taking science and moving it into the workplace. And that Taylorization, that's the word, is incredibly important. The principles of scientific management. Workers hate Taylorization, hate it. And on Friday, I'll have a little clip from a Charlie Chaplin movie for you to look at as a result of that. Our biggest user of this scientific management will be Henry Ford and the assembly line. And Henry Ford's going to build his Ford Motor Plant in Detroit. and it will be the automobile capital of the world. Moving down page 11, Ford realized that his workers are potential customers, and that again is key, and I would draw a special attention to that, because prior to this, automobiles had been luxuries, Rolls Royces, these big giant cars that only rich people could afford. Henry Ford said, I'm going to sell a lot more cars if my workers can buy them. And so that's what he does. He pays good benefits. He pays his workers very well. He is not a nice person. He's anti-Semitic, hates Jews, writes horrible things about Jews, but we'll get with that later. Takes him 1.5 hours to build a car, which is phenomenal, and Model T. And the important thing about the Model T is, as Henry Ford said, you can get a Model T in any color as long as it's black. They all were identical, exactly the same coming off that assembly line. Again, tedious work, and we'll watch on Friday a little clip of a Charlie Chaplin movie. Automobile's impact. Please put a giant box around this. Second only to the railroad is the automobile in changing the United States of America. And again, historians love to argue back and forth, but we're going to stick with the railroad because the railroad was first. Replace the steel industry, employs 6 million people, supporting industries such as rubber, glass, fabrics, highway construction, all of that stuff. Our standard of living improved. And again, the idea of other industries will be important. We're still not done. Top of page 12, speedy transportation. Highways will emerge. Leisure time that you can go into wide open spaces. Women will be less dependent because they can drive. Isolation among sections will break down, and states will lose population because people can move. Buses will come as a result of this. Suburbs spread out even further. Sad note, 1 million people are going to die in car accidents. That's a lot of people. More than all that are killed in American battles up to that point. By 1951, more people have been killed in automobile accidents from 1920 to 1951 than all of the wars up to that point. Youth become more independent, which I'm sure most of you realize, and crime will be facilitated by the automobile. We've got a little bit about the airplane. I'm not going to go too in detail about that because no one really talks about, we don't need an airplane to know about that airplane. Airplane, radio. Radio is important. Radio will become, again, an important part of the United States home life and having access to news and radio programs, and impact of the radio. I would put a box around that. A new industry as well. American life, families listening to the radio like we do TV, news, sports, politicians, all of that stuff. Movies, again, another bit of entertainment that's important. You can look at the impact of movies. And then lastly, we're going to look at, well, we're going to stop there because that's a long lecture today. All right, so that's really long. Again, you can listen to it in bits and pieces, follow your notes. I hope everybody's doing okay, and I will talk with you tomorrow. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll talk with you on Friday. Have a good day.